Hello, I'm Chanel. Welcome to my channel, and today I am doing the Booktube Newbie Tag. So the first question is, why did you start this channel? After my divorce, I decided to really get back into having hobbies. I just sort of let all my hobbies go, and I really wanted an outlet for my creativity. At that time, I was watching so many Booktube channels. So reading has been my longest hobby, and it's something that I did end up neglecting, and it's the first thing I went back into. And getting back into it, I was sort of lost of where to start reading, what books to read, and I discovered Booktube, and I just devoured it, channel after channel after channel, and I became obsessed. And I thought, why not start my own? I've always wanted to be part of a book club, and I've tried so many times, and it's just never worked out. But this way I got to talk about books to people, and it sort of allowed me to really scratch that itch of, wanting to rant or rave about something I've read, because unfortunately none of my friends or family are readers, so I don't have anyone to talk to about books, and now I do. And that was the biggest reason for me to start my channel. And I thought, just, why not? And it could also be a good opportunity to maybe make some online friends and meet some kindred spirits. The next question is, what are some fun and unique things that you can bring to Booktube? I just think that everything that everyone brings is unique, because there's no other you out there. You're the only you that is, and you're the only person with all of your life experiences, and therefore your lens on what you read and what you take from things are completely unique. No one else has all of your experiences and thoughts and feelings and emotions. But besides that, I read from quite a few different genres. Although I am quite fantasy heavy, I do also read a lot of nonfiction. I think 25% of the 400 books I read last year were nonfiction. And I read children's and middle grade books because I am a mother and I used to be a children's librarian. So I just think I just read from a lot of genres. I don't do book hauls because I think I own 20 books. I maybe purchase like 1 to 3 books per year, if that. I like to borrow heavily from the library because, that's where I used to work, and I think it's an excellent resource, and it allows you to read so many more books than maybe your wallet can afford. Yeah, otherwise, what do you bring? You bring your own unique personality, and if people really resonate with your energy, then that's fantastic. So I'm bringing me, bro. What am I most excited for about this new channel? Connecting with other people, finding like-minded individuals, and having an outlet for creativity and for discussion and for ideas and inspiration. In terms of the channel itself, I guess just growing. I think that's what everyone hopes, right? That their channel grows and they get to interact with more viewers, with more and more other individuals out there in the world. But yeah, in terms of content, I'm going to be doing my first spoilery reading vlog. And in the future, I hope to do a 24-hour reading vlog. So some new things that I haven't done before. I guess that's what I'm excited about. The next question is, why do I love reading? It is something that when I was a little girl, my mother used to read stories to me, and I would become so engrossed in them. And I've always had this sort of fondness for anything magical and whimsical and otherworldly. I had a lot of trouble fitting into this particular world, but with stories, I felt like I could live 1,000 lives and be 1,000 different me's, and it just allowed me to escape. I think that's the biggest reason that I got into reading, was to sort of escape from my current sadness or grief or fear, and it was my safe space. And it still is. It is very comforting. It's like a warm, cozy blanket and a cup of hot chocolate, and it just allows me to also open my mind and to entertain different thoughts and opinions. And I think it's an incredible tool for growth and for understanding others, and it just makes me happy. That's the biggest thing. It fills me with joy. I get so excited. Even with books that I don't like, it just stirs up passion inside of me, and I love it dearly. It's also why I ended up becoming a librarian. I just adore books and the effects that they can have on people, and how life-changing they can be, and how comforting and how cathartic. And it's the only hobby that I have ever had consistently throughout my entire life. And it's one that I'm sure will see me to the end of my days. And it's one of the things I love most about this human experience, that we get to read about all these worlds created by other humans and be a part of them. it really is to me like a form of heaven on earth. I cannot praise books highly enough, and the act of reading, it is just simply wonderful. What book or series got you into reading? I started reading when I was 4 years old, so I learned to read when I was still in kindergarten, because I remember how much I wanted to be able to read whenever I wanted, not just whenever my mother felt like reading to me. So learning to read was very important so that I could get that freedom to just dive into books whenever I wanted, willy-nilly. In terms of chapter books, I remember deeply resonating with Matilda. That book made me feel so seen, and it gave me hope that you can have a happy ending. Roald Dahl, yeah, was one of my favorite first authors as a young child, and then I remember as a teenager, Lord of the Rings. I was obsessed, and that's when I got into fantasy really, really hard. But I just love books in general. I remember I would just read the dictionary every day. I would just like find a new word and write it out. I was just obsessed with reading anything, any literature I could get my hands on. What questions would I ask my favorite booktubers? I guess I would say, is reading still fun, or does it feel like a chore, like something you have to do to make a video? That's the only concern I have, like, is doing this, if this ends up taking away some of my love of reading, I'm going to take a break. Like, I'm not going to let anything touch that. So that is my only concern. Does reading become sort of a business thing, like a job, so to speak? Besides that, I would just ask them for advice. Like, what's one piece of advice you would give me as a newcomer? Something that you would say, don't waste your time doing this, or spend a bit more time on that. That's just, yeah, I'll just pick their brain for their tips and tricks. What challenges do you think starting a booktube channel will be the hardest to overcome? So for me, this was just being on camera. I had such an issue with filming myself. I found it really difficult having the confidence to speak and sort of getting over my shyness. And I've always been a very private person. I don't have any other social media at all, and I sort of keep to myself in my little hobbit home. So that was a big thing, just putting myself out there and being vulnerable with the rest of the world. But I think over time, it's just something that you sort of become more comfortable with and you get used to, and you sort of have to just let go of worrying and overthinking and caring about it, and just focus more on what it is that is lighting you up, the reason that you wanted to do this. And for me, yeah, it's, like I said, it's the creative process. It's an outlet. It's allowing me to be more myself. It allows me to share a bit more of myself. And I think that's always a good thing. But also another thing that was difficult was learning how to edit videos. Like, learning a new program isn't easy when you're, you know, a little long in the years like I am. So that was difficult, but I've got the basics down now. I don't think my videos will ever be amazing, because it's just like, this was hard enough. I think I'm good. I can do the bare minimum, and for now, I'm happy with the bare minimum. The next question was, when did you start reading? And like I mentioned before, I remember reading since I was in kindergarten. The other kids would go and play, and I would just go and pick a book and read it to myself. And sometimes the other kids would ask me to read to them. So from a very, very early age, I was a reader, and I will always be a very voracious reader. But there were, like I said, some years where I stopped. So I think after I had my children, there would always be a lot of lulls. I would sometimes not even read for an entire year, which is hard to fathom now. Yeah, I got back into reading, and I found YouTube, and then it just lit this fire in me again. And yeah, I ended up consuming over 400 books last year. It was like being brought to a feast after having been in a famine for a very long time. But I am sort of hoping this year to find a bit more moderation, because I can get a bit obsessed. I'm someone, I think it's like the neurodivergence. I'm either like hot or cold, and when I'm into something, I am into it, and I will burn myself out on it completely. So that was last year. All the new hobbies that I discovered, I just drowned myself in. And I literally physically injured myself with some of those. So I'm hoping to try and be a bit more moderate, but I understand too my own nature, and I'll never be, you know, as moderate as other people can be. But just, yeah, if I can take it back a notch, that would be great. The next question is, where do I read? So I do a lot of reading in bed, in the evenings, before I go to sleep. That's one of my favorite times to read. It can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because if I get into a book, I might not put it down, and I'll end up impacting the hours of sleep I get, which isn't great. And that's exactly what, like, that happened last night. For instance, I started a 500-page book. And I thought, oh, well, I'll only read until 10 p.m. because 10 p.m. is when I like to have lights out, go to sleep time. And I finished that bitch at like midnight. And I'm like, God damn it, Chanel. You told yourself you wouldn't do it and you did it. So I don't have a lot of willpower when it comes to putting a really good book down. So a lot of the times I'll tend to pick up a nonfiction before bed because I know that with nonfiction, I can easily put it down and pick it back up. But sometimes if it's too engaging and it's making my brain think too much, that's also not great. So I'm still tweaking that. You know, I'm trying to find the happy medium of a book that I can, you know, put down. But I do read in this bed. I also read a lot on the couch. I like being comfy, you know, I like nestling in and getting myself all cozy and situated. I'm not a big reader outside. I know a lot of people love reading outdoors, but there's just too much external stimulation for me and I find it annoying and irritating. I've tried reading at the beach. I will on a Kindle. I don't like bringing my books to the beach because I don't want them to get wrecked. But most of the time, man, yeah, it's the couch or it's in the bed. I don't really read at my desk or at the table or while eating. It's just, yeah, normally I'm just curled up somewhere with a cup of tea. And I will also read on a plane. That's the thing I like to do the most. I will read on a plane. And when I was a little kid, I used to read in the car, but now I like to keep my wits about me. Even as a passenger, I like to just be aware of my surroundings. But yeah, as a kid, I would read in the car and it was the best way to pass the time. And I would spend all my lunches in the library. I didn't make friends until I was 12 years old. Before then, yeah, my entire junior school experience, I was in the library before school, during lunch and recess, and after school. The next question is, what type of books do you like to read? So my main bread and butter is fantasy. Just nothing fills me up inside as much as fantasy. I can just really immerse myself in that world. It takes me out of the mundane, everyday problems that we have here in the contemporary realm. And I just love it. And it's one of those things where I can digest really heavy topics and themes if it's in a fantasy setting. Like, I don't want to read a contemporary book where someone's going around like slicing and dicing people up. It makes me feel sick. But in a fantasy world, torture, no problems. Like rape, it's fine. I can just take all of that stuff. I don't know what it is. It's just really easy for me to just let go and enjoy the ride. And it's, yeah, I get such a thrill from reading it. So fantasy is definitely hands down my favorite genre of all time. I love fantasy romance. Like if I'm going to pick a romance book, I would prefer a fantasy romance. It's my favorite kind. I do also like historical romance and I'm getting into contemporary. So romance is also like a subgenre that I'm sort of getting into. I always just like it as a sub-theme in a book. I love love. So if any book has a lovely relationship, that makes me really happy. But otherwise, I would say the other genres I read the most would be children's and middle grade because I have kids. So I read a lot of those. And I also read tons of nonfiction. I like learning. I don't like school. I didn't like university, but I love learning at home with a book. That's my favorite way to expand my mind and learn new things. So nonfiction, definitely. And in the realm of nonfiction, I guess most of it would be self-help, self-improvement. I'm always trying to better myself as much as I can, you know, psychology, parenting, gardening. Like that's a whole genre. I'll read anything in a nonfiction, except not a lot of memoirs. So I would say the least genre I read would be memoirs, like autobiographies or biographies. I did read some this year and they were a pleasant experience, but yeah, it's just not something I'm really that into. I don't gravitate towards it. I have really gotten into graphic novels this year. I know LGBTQIA is its own genre, but like I read a lot of books from that genre. I'm getting back into poetry. So the Goodreads Choice Awards really opened up a lot of the genres for me. Look, I do find thrillers entertaining, but I can only take them very small doses. They make me feel like not so great inside. So I think it's that whole thing about like the contemporary murdery setting, just, it makes me feel a bit gross. But they are very addictive to read. I will admit that, like, okay, I can see why people love them. It's, you know, I read sci-fi. I'm very picky with sci-fi though. I either really love it or it's mid. I do still read YA, but it has to be mature, and I hate saying that, but yeah, it has to be, maybe they're 19-year-olds. I just do not want to read about anybody that's under the age of 18, like having sex. It just makes me feel icky, because I'm 37 now, so I just can't do it anymore. I'm like, I'm not a teenager anymore. I don't want to read about teens getting it on. So yeah, for me, YA, they have to be 18 and over, unless there's really nothing sexual in it. Like I said, a lot of middle grade books, I'll read about young children because there's none of that in there. I'm happy as long as it's chaste. If they're 18 and under, it's got to be real sweet and innocent. Otherwise, yeah, they need to be older teens. But like there are still some great YA out there, like really interesting stories. So a lot of the time I will DNF a lot of YA because I'll just be like, okay, no, it's not for me, but it's still a genre that I'm interested in, especially the fantasy side of YA can be amazing, or even the sort of sci-fi dystopian YA. But like I said, it depends on each book. I've dipped my toes into horror. Juniper and Thorn was in the horror category, and I really, really love that book. Yeah, it's heavy, it's dark, but because there was a fantastical element to it, I was fine. So for me, once again, with horror, it has to have the fantasy. If it's just straight up horror, it's a no from me, bro. Yeah, I like to be open. I like to read whatever catches my attention and give it a go. I am very quick to DNF these days though, because a lot of the time I can, especially if I can tell the book's just not for me, like it might be a great book and it's well written or the story's cool, but it just isn't for me, I'll just DNF it because I don't want to read it and then give it a low rating just because it wasn't to my tastes. But then the same goes for really badly written books. Or I'm like, no, if I keep reading this, I'm going to give it a 1 or 2 stars. So let's save myself some of that pain. But yeah, I have gotten better at sort of guessing what it is that I like. But like I said, I also just want to keep an open mind. And like, yeah, when you try new stuff, sometimes you'll be disappointed, but then sometimes you can find an unexpected gem. So what my favorite things to read are fantasy, especially if there's fantasy romance, and especially if there's an enemies to lovers trope. I am a sucker for that, and I eat it right up. In terms of like fantasy realm, I love the Fae. They're just cunning and cruel, and I find them very entertaining. And I also like anything to do with witches and that kind of magic. I also read things like magazines. I love reading food magazines or parenting and health wellness magazines. So it's another form of literature, and I do like reading it. I read general fiction, I guess, but that's very hit and miss for me. Some have been great, some have been real duds. So general fiction is one of those, like, 50-50. So those are all of the official questions. In terms of other things, I do prefer paperbacks over hardbacks. I just find hardbacks difficult to read. I have gotten obsessed with all of these like limited edition sprayed edges, foil covers, things of books. Like books weren't like that back in my day. I think they're really awesome. So if I ever find like a 5-star book that I want to have in my library, I'm always like trying to find those like special editions now, which is harder in Australia. I know in America you just have like all these great subscriptions like Lumacrate and Fairy Loot and all that sort of stuff, and they have their special editions. Or in the UK, I think you have Waterstones. We don't really get a lot of special editions like in bookstores here or as part of book subscriptions, so it's harder to find, but I am kind of obsessed with those. In terms of a real book over a Kindle, I still prefer real books. It's a more immersive experience to me, just the smell and the tactile feeling sensation of the book and the turning of the page. It just really gets me into it a lot more. But I held out on getting an e-reader for so long. I was so stubborn about it. I was like, you'll never see me with one of those things. And then my ex-husband was like, we're going on a trip and you can't be packing 20 books, because I'm a speed reader as well. Like I read a lot. So I'd pack like 20 books, and he's like, you can't do that anymore. We need the space. We've got children now. You cannot bring a whole suitcase just of books. And yeah, that was a game changer. Like it is the most convenient thing when you are traveling. It is amazing. Or like I said, if I go to the beach, it just slides right in, and I've got so many books on hand. So I do think that it is amazing, especially because you can borrow. The ebooks online, I just got into audiobooks. I never listened to an audiobook before last year. And once again, I thought, okay, my library has free audiobooks. Let's do it. Let's try it out. And it took a bit of getting used to, of figuring out what I can listen to. I still do find it difficult to stay tuned in. So it is something I can only do if not too much of my attention has been taken. So if I go for a walk, I can do it, or if I'm crocheting. But if I'm trying to do it while cleaning the house, nah. I won't. I will zone out so hard. Listening is not the way I learn. I learn by visually reading. So but it's still been great, like I said, in terms of when there's sort of more monotonous tasks, I'm able to enjoy them more by having a book on in the background. So audiobooks have been fantastic in that way. In terms of like a series or standalone, I prefer standalones. At most trilogies. Anything that goes over a trilogy, I actually legit get annoyed and get mad about it. I'm like, no, put me out of my misery and end this, please. Stop stringing me along. So yeah, I really do prefer standalones, and I would just prefer that author writes a new book every year. And I'll just keep reading their stuff. But otherwise, yeah, duologies are great. I think they're fab. Trilogies is a max. So that's how I feel about that. Do I annotate and highlight? No, I can't do it. It's just too much of a sacrilege. I cannot write in a book. I would feel awful about it. So I don't do that. Plus it just feels like school to me. That just feels like English class. And I really hated all of my academic years. No, I don't annotate. Sometimes I might write out a quote if there's one that stands out. Otherwise, yeah, no. And I bookmark. I would never like dog ear a book. Blasphemy of it. Good Lord. And buying versus library, bro. Like, it's free. It's free. Like I said, if I find a 5-star book, I'm happy then to throw my money at that author. There's nothing more upsetting to me than if I've spent $30, $40 on a book and I hated it and I immediately want it gone from my vicinity, and I just think that was a waste of trees, that was a waste of resources, of my money. So yeah, for me it's library all the way. But then I know like maybe some countries don't have great library resources and free books, so I understand if you need to buy books, but for me personally, library over buying. For length of books, I prefer, my favorite is maybe the 200 to 300 range. I think that's real sweet, and it's like enough that I'm satisfied, but not too little that I'm left like, well, that was short, that was brief. And in regards to like protagonists, I do prefer female protagonists, just because it's just a lot easier for me to really get into it. When it's a female, I just connect more to the character than if it's male. But that being said, like I said, Lord of the Rings was one of my favorite books, and that was mostly men. So there's no real hard and fast rules with that, just sort of like a soft preference. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything that I could say. Please comment as much as you like. I love comments. It's fun. It makes my day to chat to someone else, because I have so little human interaction in my real world. And I'm on Goodreads and Storygraph and library things, so feel free to add me on there or recommend me a book. I'm always up for recommendations. But I think that is everything. I hope that you are having an enchanting morning, afternoon or evening, and as always, stay wild, star child.